Hello and welcome to Colonial Outcast, the anti-imperialist podcast that your uncle would if he said things about the Super Bowl halftime performance like, I didn't understand a word he said. Why don't you play actual music? He would hate. I am your host, Greg Stoker, and we're going to be talking about music, revolutionary ideology, the precarious position of empire within the context of this dark American experiment, and whatever else we feel like talking about. Because I am joined today by Immortal technique, rapper, and activist who if you are into rap or have any sort of robust politics, probably know about. I don't have much of a knowledge base in the genre. I came to him through activism circles. Like in 2001, Immortal Technique released his first album, Revolutionary Volume 1, without the help of a record label or distribution, instead using money earned from his rap battle triumphs. In September 2003, he received the coveted hip-hop quotable in The Source for a song entitled Industrial Revolution from his second album, and he is the only rapper in history to have a hip-hop quotable while being unsigned. And you've been spreading the word ever since, a foundation of activism here in America. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me. But ever since that happened, a couple of other people got an unsigned without being signed. But then I definitely was the first one. But I think a lot of people have asked me about that and said to me, what was your conflict about the traditional route? And I'll just tell you, for all the young people that are watching your show, Greg, I once told myself, hey, if I don't have a record deal by the time I'm 23, then I'm going to quit and get like a union job where I can, just be stable. And here I am in my mid 40s, and I've never had a record deal of that nature. So I tell people, carving your own path is the only way to get to where you want to be. And if you allow other people to write your story, they will never paint you in a positive light. So I figured that by going independent and having independent music, that was the only way to be able to tell the stories I wanted to tell. Also, I think that we're in a very different political climate. So I know that you have the capability to kind of superimpose images after the interview. So if you could show people the artwork from Revolutionary Volume 2, it's basically the Oval Office with the entire presidential staff shot up. And bin Laden is in there too with a bullet in his head, and there's a paper in his hand that says CIA because his CIA name was Timothy Osman. And
Mhm.
for years, people didn't understand that connection. And I started making music in an era in very much the post 9/11 era. Sometimes
Right.
people associate me with the 90s, but I never actually had a record out in the 90s. I was in prison. And when I got out of being incarcerated, I came home. I was trying to get a job. I went to college or try to re-go to college, but I just felt like it wasn't giving me what I wanted. I was getting much better grades, but I kept being drawn to these battles and the songs that I had written while I was locked up. And eventually, I just started talking about these things. I wrote story rhymes, and people gravitated to it because of the realness of it.
Yeah. And this is kind of like an anecdotal story. As I said, I don't really have like a solid knowledge base in like rap or hip hop, but I've known about your work since like 2003. I was just starting like as a guitar player, getting into more extreme genres like punk and metal, and I was on like LimeWire trying to rip this album, like this black metal band called Immortal, and all that like came up in the search, no matter how I modulated, the query was Immortal Technique. So eventually I got like so frustrated that I downloaded whichever album cover had like the hammer and sickle on the wall.
That
And I
was
was
that's Revolutionary Volume 1. So when people
like,
ask me about that, they say,
yeah,
"Hey, is this about like are you promoting communism or something?" And I said, "Listen, what Revolutionary Volume 1, 2, and 3 are is a progressive story. And in the very beginning, it's soldiers against the police. If you look on the back cover of Revolutionary Volume 1, there's piled up dead cops, or sorry, on the front, and in the back, there's a soldier. And then in the second one, the police officers aren't dead on the front. There are government officials that are dead, but you can't see it because the album cover doesn't unfold. But on the back cover, there's me again, dressed up like a secret agent. And the premise of the albums, which are supposed to be like a complete thought, are that the the progression of us, like a civil war in the United States, is never going to be what people imagine. It's
right.
not, oh, this is one even side compared to another. They're talking about the police versus the Coast Guard, one half of the Marines versus the other, Army Rangers versus Navy SEALs. It just turns into that. It'll descend into that.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh, don't know if we lost you.
I think no, I didn't lose you. We're just like living in unprecedented times. But when I saw the album cover as like a
Hello?
13-year-old, I was like, "What the hell is this Marxist BS?" And flash forward 20 years, I'm on the level interviewing you. Funny how that works. So, what kind of interests me in the context of like the MAGA response to? I thought it was really interesting watching the Super Bowl halftime show, and I'm not really interested in like doing a huge critique or talking about it too much, but what kind of interests me in the context of like the MAGA response to the Super Bowl halftime show, which is like one of the premier cultural events of American society. That's the only reason I'm like really talking about it too much. Is they say the same shit about like rap as they do about like any sort of countercultural music that I grew up with. Like, we can't understand you. Try making real music, and I don't want to like talk too much. It was just like there's a lot of division on like the left about like the Super Bowl halftime show, like what it meant, what it represented. I was like wondering if you just real quick had any thoughts about it.
Sure. Well, there's two things that kind of stood out to me. One is this idea that there is a left in the United States, because when I hear right-wing figures talk about the left, they're talking about Democrats. And those people are not the left to me. To me, Greg, the Democratic Party is a center-right party that is based on about business. It has an image of protecting civil rights, and it has civil rights icons that used to be involved in the party. And there are probably some progressive people on the outskirts of it. But by and large, the central command structure is based on a party of business.
Yeah.
And the Republican Party is a party of business too, but it has a much better outreach program for kind of religious maniacs. So when they delve into like what we discuss as counterculture, that's the other thing I wanted to say before we get into it. It's very hard for them to understand counterculture because they think they are counterculture. So how would
Yeah.
they possibly understand it? And my response to that always is, you see someone as delusional as Elon Musk, who obviously lives in an echo chamber, and someone has never either had the pay grade to come to him and say honestly, or to come to his friend Rogan or someone else and say, hey brother, are you counterculture when you have the presidency, the Senate, the Congress, the Supreme Court, and a plethora of oligarchs that back whatever system you have, right?
Yeah.
And to be fair, we're not singling out Joe. It could be any outlet of any left or right wing range to say, hey, listen, what makes you counterculture, right? You are the system now, right? Now you're striking against the empire, but you're the empire, right? You have the capacity to create and recreate all these laws and rewrite whatever you want. And somehow you're still the perpetual victim, which is what we see in the marketing of the genocide in Gaza. We're the victims, right? But we're committing these atrocities. So I think in terms of counterculture, the people that are criticizing something as nuanced as a Super Bowl performance, they wouldn't know what counterculture was, you know what I mean, if it shot them in the head. And I think that the problem is that you're looking at it from a perspective where different audiences are looking at different generations of hip hop. And even in hip hop, that's an issue, because in the 90s era that people refer to as the golden era, I know a lot of artists that came before that, that were what we call the foundational rappers, like Grandmaster Caz, right? Melly Mel. I learned from all these people. People think that, oh, KRS-One is old school. No, no, no. KRS-One is not old school. Coke La Rock is old school. KRS-One might be old school to the people that are young now, right? Biggie is old school. If you're a little kid, Nelly is old school to you, right? But the reality is that these people laid a structural foundation for an art that absolutely was counterculture at the time, right? And I'll leave you with a verse, just one verse
Okay.
from KRS-One, and he had a song called "The Truth," and it was about religion, right? He said, "Listen to the lyric as the negative is shrinking. It's shrinking out your mind when you just decide to change your thinking. Now, one of the first things we have to switch around, of course, is Jesus Christ and him dying on the cross." He said, "You're looking at the cross, and surrounded in its history, with Jesus on the cross hanging in total misery. Now separate Jesus from the cross so you can see the truth about the cross and the cross's history. The cross was created by the Roman government. Its only purpose and use is capital punishment. But Jesus Christ was all about the revolution. So the cross was used in Jesus Christ's execution. See, what if Jesus Christ was hung upon a tree? Upon every church wall, that's exactly what you'd see. If Jesus Christ was shot in the head with no respect, you don't have little gold guns around your neck. If Jesus Christ was killed in an electric chair, now get it, you'd be kneeling to the electric chair with Jesus still in it. You gaze upon the cross and you see the execution and you yell, stop the violence that the cross is still used in. Do you see what I mean? The
Mhm.
reflective nature and lyrical bounty of something of that era is perpetually different. And so even those 90s rappers that were kicking that type of knowledge, they weren't liked by the older generation that came before them. Why?
Mhm.
You curse too much, right? You're talking about violence and sex and drugs. This wasn't what we created hip hop for. Hip hop was an art that was meant to revitalize people. But the 90s generation had a different perspective on hip hop. So they said, listen, the civil rights generation of Black and Latino people were asking for things. We're not asking for things. Our hip hop generation, the Malcolm X generation, the Generation X people, that's how we looked at it. We didn't look at it as, please let us be part of America. We looked at it as, hey, you stole us from home and now you want us to kiss your ass and assimilate to this culture. No, fuck you. We don't
Mhm.
want to be part of you. We can civilize ourselves. You've never gone anywhere and civilized anybody. You've taught us a bunch of fake history. And, I always tell people, even if in the conflicts that we've had that have nothing to do with us, but shape the minds of the youth, right? Like during the war on terror, we always use the example of the Crusades. That was brought up multiple times. Oh, this is a new crusade. But I always remind people, Greg, half the Crusades were not against Muslims. I'm going to say that
Oh
again
no.
for your audience. That sometimes they this is what has to be directly relatable to today. Half the
Mhm.
Crusades were not against Muslims; they were against other Christians for the inner consolidation of power
Right.
in Europe. And so
I
the inner
actually.
conflicts that happen in hip hop and the world are not for the rest of the world to see. They're to consolidate the assimilation inside the United States and make people say, yeah, sure, we want to accept this culture now. So in the 70s, 80s, you wouldn't find Black people in television or movies like that in any sort of pejorative role that indicated strength or power.
Mhm.
Now you see them all the time, but the difference is that every single Black person you see is a person that works for the state, a CIA agent, someone that
Mhm.
works for the government. So they're all of a sudden the good guys now. Right? We get to watch movies that are basically should be funded by the State Department if they're not, because every person that's in it is some CIA agent that's miraculously found a way to not be morally bankrupt for an hour and 45 minutes.
Mhm.
Right? You don't see them kill kids or poison people. They're out to save the world. None of the dirty things that they have to do that are conflicting inside a human's mind are actually present in the storyline.
Yeah. Kind of a really interesting point about the Crusades. In the post 9/11 era, it's kind of like reimagined that like we are fighting an existential uh, threat against like radical Islam, and we need to go reclaim the Holy Land. I mean, even
Mhm.
our current SecDef, Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. I mean, I was arrested at his Senate confirmation hearing, but he's got like the old like Knights Templar Jerusalem cross thing going on, and
Mhm.
um, I remember like when this SEAL team came into theater that we're doing joint operations with. They had like a bunch of like Knights Templar crosses like on their
Mhm.
kit patches. I was like, oh, what are you guys trying to do? You guys trying to be bankers? So this is like a long-standing thing that we've got going on.
Well, just always remember the Knights Templar symbol, though, is
Mhm.
typically red. It has to be red.
Yeah.
So the difference is that Mr. Hezekiah and the rest of them that have the black cross, that's different. That represents Knights of the Christian Teutonic Order. And when people look at that or the origin of that symbol, I'll give you two examples of crusades that people never talk about. Well, three to be polite. One is the Livonian Crusade that was actually
Mhm.
conducted by Teutonic Knights, which is how the Baltic states were forcibly Christianized. Right? It wasn't just Islam that forcibly Christianized people. You can find multiple examples of that in Christianity, even much more than in Islam, if you want my honest opinion.
Yeah.
Second of all is the Cathar Crusade, which I thought is interesting because that's where we
That
get
one was a doozy.
right? Kill them all and
Let
sort them
God
out,
sort them out.
right? And I think that the last one that people forget is everyone blames the Turks for the fall of Constantinople in 1453.
Mhm.
But by the time the Turks got to Constantinople, it was a fractured shell of itself because it had been overthrown in 1204 AD by the participants of what people call the Fourth Crusade. And that's a
Yeah.
book that I think people should research because it's the origin of what people call the Latin Empire. And the Latin Empire was basically when the Western European powers took over Byzantium and turned it into a money laundering operation and basically broke the Byzantine Empire into 6 different principalities: the Duchy of Achaia, the Despotate of Epirus, the Empire of Trebizond, the Empire of Nicaea, and then I believe it was one other. But I think what has transpired as a result of that is that they destroyed the buffer state between Europe and itself. So if they're confused about why Janissaries showed up in the 1500s on the doorstep of Eastern Europe, it's because they decimated the Byzantine Empire during that time. So I think it goes without saying that these individuals are playing with ancient symbolism, but that very few people have a real concrete understanding of what that actually means. Like in the Crusades, we talk about, oh man, we're fighting for freedom. Okay, the people that we attacked, right? You and I both came to this conclusion probably around the same. The people that we attacked, are they living in a better condition now because of their freedom? Do they have more freedoms? No, I think we could argue that the people of Afghanistan and Iraq were affected and have less freedoms because of this. And realistically speaking, you and me also share that fate. So the Crusades ideologically are happening again in the sense that they're not fought just for the outer conquest and expansionist policies that we typically think they are. That is only one half of the point. The other half is to consolidate power within the structure itself by saying, hey, we're in wartime. If you question me, this is against the war, right? So this started in the post 9/11 world, where if you weren't pro invasion of Iraq, you hated America, right? So much so that the French, which are some of the most violent people in history,
Mhm.
we thought they were cowards because they wouldn't invade Iraq with us. No, according to Sykes-Picot, that's not their slice. Now, if we get involved, every time we've been involved in Syria and Lebanon, because
Yeah,
of
then they get involved.
the
But
French will get involved.
yeah, I mean, I do remember that time when the French wouldn't be part of the coalition, so we had to change French fries to freedom fries.
Freedom fries, right?
So, yeah, but the massive cognitive dissonance in retrospect, because I enlisted in Ranger Regiment like 2 days after I got my high school graduation. I was like, get me the fuck out of here. I don't care. I wasn't really even that political about it. But the cognitive dissonance was like in 2009 when I went through basic infantry training before I deployed. Like we knew that the Iraq War was a hoax. There was no weapons of mass destruction. So I was just like, over the past few years, just kind of like reflecting on the massive cognitive dissonance that I had to like willingly go into that, knowing full well that it was an illegal war. It was unjust. I was actually too young to have gone to Iraq. I was just in Afghanistan. But I don't know, like the post 9/11 propaganda was a hell of a drug. I guess I don't
but
really know.
but I think we're still. I love that you bring that up because we're still
Yeah.
suffering from that. I think the what has happened as a result of that is something that and I don't know how many other people, but I've been using this term for years. I'm sure other people have too. It's called the 9/11 effect. And it's when all politics in the United States shifted to the right. So the
Yeah.
people that were in the center, right, were considered leftists now. The
Mhm.
people that were on the right are considered kind of middle ground moderates. The people on the far right are considered standard Republicans. And the lunatics that, were normally holding pencils in a cup, ranting in front of colleges, are now seen as slightly far right establishment people, whereas actual leftists are seen as communists that are trying to overthrow the country. But you and I both can look at a problem logically and say the United States used the image of black communism or black revolutionaries in the 60s and 70s to scare white people into accepting authoritarian policies that were against their will, and also by ignoring the real problem that the internal or the new civil war doesn't start because less than 3% of the population of black people are willing to become, you know, Black Panthers and start an armed war. No,
Mhm.
the thing that would cause the most amount of death, murder, to kill in any scenario would be when religious right wingers realize they no longer need the Republican Party. That the Republican Party is a shell of itself, and that what they want is to complete the philosophy of the religious right, which we call the Seven Mountains theory. The Seven Mountains is to reclaim the seven principles of the United States of education, the military, media, entertainment. It goes into these seven structures, but I recommend people in your audience to look that up. The Seven Mountains of the religious right. These people wish to reclaim this. And so, in order to be able to do that, they've decided to first push all these politics to the right and therefore frame it as if you're going against this, you're going against not just the will of the country, but you're somehow ungodly, as
Right.
if what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan and the killing of 1.1 million people um, was godly, as if in any way, shape, or form it's anything except what we saw in Gaza. And that was my point for the past maybe year, talking to social media figures and anyone else who would listen. I would tell them what's happening in Gaza is terrible. I also know that if we had social media in 2003,
Mhm.
the way we have it in 2024, we would have seen little children in Iraq getting rolled over by tanks. We would have seen Blackwater and Navy SEALs and whatever other branches of the military that were active in these areas killing people, perhaps indiscriminately. There would have been more dead children than we have seen in Gaza, buried under structures. You know, as a person who has a lot of military people in his family, I can tell you that I've heard some stories that made people incredibly uncomfortable to the point that they felt like killing themselves because of what they had participated in. And I even wrote a song about that that I've never released, about the idea of what a soldier goes through when he decides to commit suicide. And I think that it was telling because more soldiers, and this was something that happened a few years ago, committed suicide as a result of their service than actually died in the war in Iraq. And
Oh
I
yeah,
think
that figure's
very
been around
statistic.
for a long
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think what's also interesting and also related to that is that more police officers have died in New York City because of 9/11 related illnesses than have died because they got shot on duty or anything else having to do with that. And
Mhm.
my point in bringing this up, Greg, is that we understand that there's a tier justice system in this country. If a police officer is caught killing someone in a hit and run, or shooting someone by accident, or they're drunk driving, or if they sexually assault a teenager, their service is taken into account, right? If you were a
Mhm.
doctor and you were drunk and you operated on someone, the lives of all the people you saved is not taken into account. But as a police officer, you're supposed to know the law better than anyone else, right? And
They
your
don't. Yeah.
service is taken into account. So if you sexually assault a child, there's a different system for you. And I'm not just going by, oh, this is communist leftist propaganda. No, for the people that are watching your show because they secretly hate you, fuck you. Look it up on your own. Be mad at reality, not me. It's not a narrative. The truth is not a narrative. That's just what it is. So my point in bringing that up, Greg, is that if the country will lie to its tier one citizens, what the fuck do you think that it cares about us? They told those people, when people ask me, oh, you're a 9/11 conspiracy theorist, I said, no, I'm not. I've never come up with a conspiracy. My conspiracy is that the government was not truthful about all the aspects of 9/11. And I left it at that. And when people ask, how can you justify that? I say simply, they told people the air was safe to breathe because they wanted to get Wall Street back online. And meanwhile, there was a chemical weapons depot or some sort of chemical facility on the 88th floor or the 83rd floor of the World Trade Center. And everyone in New York knew about it, you know? And
Mhm.
Rudy Giuliani had famously placed his counterterrorism headquarters in Tower 2, I believe it was, which is why he was on the street at the time. So when people ask me, oh, you think they lied? I said, well, they lied to their tier one civilians and citizens that the air was safe to breathe, and they watched them die and then denied them medical benefits for the better part of 20 years. So you think they care about telling you the truth because you're a Democrat or a Republican? Like, who's being naive now, Kay? Right? For the people that watch The Godfather, who's being naive now? At some point, we have to accept that whatever you choose to identify politically as, this government doesn't see them telling you the truth as a priority. they see you like a child, and they
Yeah.
treat you like one in that sense.
Yeah, even when you're like in the system, you don't get told all the information. Like when we were prepping to go to Syria, I had a top secret security clearance, and I still wasn't getting like, and I was code word cleared for the entire theater. I still wasn't getting like half of the information, or like, I had no access to like official reports about like who we're funding, what militias, like what
Have you,
militants
have you ever
going.
heard of a military program called the Jason Group?
Jason Group? No, let me
Jason
just.
Group is a Vietnam era military thing. It just reminded me of what you brought up. So my father went
Oh,
to Columbia.
Jason. Oh, it's an advisory group.
Yeah. So the
Okay.
Jason Group, my father believes that that was active at Columbia University when he was there. My father was recruited out of the Peruvian military as a physicist to come to Columbia University and study under a man called Dr. Beshears. And what he said is that all these different offices in Columbia University, Brown, MIT, they were all working on different things for the government that allowed them to structure weapons. Like, you remember, you ever seen the this series on Disney Plus, the Mandalorian, where they're
Yeah.
all building different parts of the Death Star, and yet none of them understand what they're really doing. So my father said that his team was structured. They had a corner, a right wing angle, like a 90-degree angle, and they were running water through it. And the water slowed down so much at this corner, and so they were structured to build some sort of physical structure that would physically, using physics, allow the water to not stop when it reached that corner, but rather speed up. And then every time it touched the corner to speed up. And this was apparently put inside a cooling system for nuclear reactors. And other people had different things that they were set up to do. So in terms of keeping people out of the loop like they did to you in the military, that's par for the course for every aspect of what this government has to do. Now, whether it's for their security purposes or simply for keeping the public ignorant to what they're spending money on, while claiming that they don't have money for you, is insane,
Yeah.
because that's the government's trick. They got $28 trillion, and they're like, oh yeah, I gave your money to these immigrants, so they can rage bait you into be angry at those people instead of the
Yeah.
fact that they just spent $280,000 on a wrench.
Yeah. And I don't know if you saw this story. It's breaking right now. Elon Musk, the slasher in chief, head of Department of Government Efficiency, I don't know, he's saved the taxpayers now $1 billion, which is like a drop in the bucket for the US budget. But Tesla just got awarded a $400 million contract to make armored electronic vehicles for
Mm.
law enforcement. So yeah, it just goes to your point about, yes, we're going to
And
rage
people
bait
thought the
you.
quid pro quo was in Ukraine. No, it's right here, ladies and gentlemen. It's in front of your
Yeah,
face. It's at City Hall. I think that that's what people need to understand. The world is so connected now because of the internet that most movies are implausible with modern technology, because they would be over with a simple phone call, right? Oh, I can't identify him. Remember, like the movie Heat. I don't know if it's really him. Okay, look at the picture of him on your phone and see if it's really him at the end of the movie, right? I think what we're living in now is this quasi future where we thought we would have flying cars, and I'm sure we have that technology, but it's not economically viable for people. So we're moving into a place in which, you know, individuals are either concerned that there's some sort of cataclysmic event that's going to happen that the government knows about and won't tell people about, if we're going to go down a rabbit hole, or people think, hey, this is just typical empire. It's going to expand until it implodes. And that's what happens to a lot of human societies. They expand until they implode. And the American government is still in an expansionist mood. And it's doing so because it has the capacity to do so. And I think what people forget is that, irrespective of what they present as them being enemies, the United States has a very different policy towards its enemies. It doesn't want to destroy you completely, it wants
Mhm.
to decimate you. And what I mean by decimation is that decimation is not destroying everybody. People often misuse that word. That's
It's
a
one in
word
10.
that comes right from the Roman legion. And the
Mhm.
reason why it's done is because the Romans believed in the theory of the 10th man. They believed that one man out of 10 could pollute the other 10. That if one man had doubt, that the other men would have doubt. So they found the doubtful people out of the 10th and they removed them. And what we have now, in terms of, and the reason I brought up Rome, is because we have this sort of fake Pax Americana that we've created.
Yeah.
In the same sense that the Pax Romana was not a Pax Romana for the people of Dacia. It was not a Pax Romana for the people of Gaul or any of these other structures.
Just for
But
the Italian heartland.
yes, and always remember that the resurgence of their empire in Byzantium comes from their connection to client states that now
Mhm.
did all of the fighting for them. So the
Yeah.
Roman Empire evolved from using their own troops to saying, okay, we're going to elect someone that has a much more pleasing way of speaking to people and therefore employs foreign mercenaries, Varangians, Pechenegs, whoever's up there in north of Macedonia to do the fighting for us. And therefore, in multiple scenarios, we've seen that happen here in the United States, where people saw Barack Obama as this peacemaker because he wasn't using American troops, rather than using American mercenaries and drones. And I think what that touches on and leads us into is this idea that Americans have that because the president changes, the direction of the country is going to change. And you and I both know that that's not true. Joe Biden set up what Trump is going to do now.
Yeah.
George Bush set up what Obama was going to do. And I
Yeah.
remember, sorry.
No. I just wanted to like piggyback off that and say, like, I got into theater in Afghanistan when I was still in the military, when Obama was president. So the first deployment I did was based off Bush policies. And the
Mm,
second and the next three deployments I did was Obama policies. And they were actually like way more ruthless in terms of the drone strike tempo, direct action, special operations raids, like increased by 2x
mm.
under Obama, and it was just a way more ruthless policy. But it wouldn't have existed if George Bush didn't pave the way, just like what Trump was doing, is doing right now, or trying to do with the whole Gaza relocation thing. Don't want to get into it because it's absurd,
No, no,
but
no, no,
but
but just jumping off that too. It's funny. When I went on this, the sister Abby Martin show, Abby Martin.
Empire Files, yeah,
I said that she asked me about the comparison between the two presidents, and I've always said this, and it makes people angry, but it's genuinely the truth, and they can be upset all day long. I said Obama made spineless liberals who never did anything for anyone feel like they were progressives, and
hmm
Trump made stupid people feel smart. People who have a rudimentary understanding of history all of a sudden are now, oh, we understand the global politics of this, but they can always check out because it's too complicated when it comes to Israel and Palestine or some other issue that actually causes them to have to put their reputation on the line. And in this case, that's what we're experiencing now in terms of having whatever media representation and open debate on any live streaming channel. We're not getting that factored in. So essentially, what we have is half the story missing all the time.
yeah.
There's no
I
point
mean,
of origin, right? There's
right.
no one mentions 1948 when we discuss Israel and Palestine, except the people that want to have a historical discussion. And what I noticed is that during those discussions, people typically come at individuals who are attacking the status quo the way a fourth-rate lawyer would. And what I mean by that is if you're a fourth-rate lawyer and you have a witness on the stand that's incriminating your client, that has evidence that they murdered somebody, that was a witness to it, the only route for you is to discredit the witness. You cannot argue with the facts. So what you have to do is change the nature of how people view the witness. So what we see happening in terms of Palestine is that they can't dispute the facts. So what they have to do is attack the character of the people who are witnessing it and willing to say, hey, the emperor has no clothes. There are 30,000 dead children. You people claim to care about Christian lives, right? But now you've become the Pope during the Cathar Crusade. Oh, are the children dead in Palestine? Are they Christian or Muslim? Well, if they're Christian, then I guess Jesus will know them when they get there. So
Yeah.
they're going to be fine.
Yeah. Sorry, I had to relook up the exact quote. Kill them all, let God sort them out was
Mhm.
is a informal slogan of the Green Berets, but it was kill them all, God
God will
will know
know.
his own.
Yeah.
Yeah, God will know his own.
And I
Right.
think what's telling about that is when you look at that particular era, people forget that the Crusades did not just encompass um, these areas in the Middle East. There was a crusade in Spain because the Moors held Spain for the better
Yeah.
part of
Uh,
100 years.
yeah,
And they also
the
advanced it,
that was the Reconquista.
the
If anyone was
Reconquista.
interested, yeah.
But also remember that the Reconquista is important because it's it's capped off with with an Alhambra decree that
Mm.
says that all Jews and Muslims will leave Spain under penalty of confiscation of property or person. So confiscation of property, we all know, means we're taking all your shit. Confiscation of person, well, that means, hey man, you're gonna be an indentured servant, pretty much a slave until forever. So the what happened is most of this population of Sephardic Jewish people, Muslims that were white, black, whatever Moorish individuals, because a lot of Berbers are very light-skinned people. They're
Mhm.
as light as you, or they could be as dark as the darkest person I know. So those people moved to the Ottoman Empire. And
Yeah.
so what's interesting is a lot of historians are re-examining World War One and saying that that is actually the last crusade, not the ones we had before. Because World War One is Europe and its European powers re-entering the Middle East, occupying those areas and cutting the original countries into these new kind of military subsections, like the way the South was during Reconstruction. So you have this giant swath of land that's now recarved. So if you look at a map before World War One, they don't call it Iraq, they don't call it Kuwait, they call it Mesopotamia. It still had that name for through 4,000 years from its advent. So I think what people don't understand is that these entire area, Assyria, okay, let's restructure that. We're going to redraw a line. Now our business is off this, but it also forces people to then re-examine the history that they've always been taught about the conflicts in this subsection area. And that means, fuck, what does the last crusade actually mean? Well, it means that we think that we're a Christian nation, and yet the higher ups are saying no. In the same way that the crusades were formed, outer conflict for inner consolidation of the Catholic Church. What's happened in the United States is there's been a consistent outer conflict for the inner consolidation of authoritarian regimes based on a person's political preference. So if you're a Republican, you think that the Democrats are against freedom and they're offering you this repression, and therefore you have to fight against them. And if you're on the opposite side, then you think those other people are in the way of freedom. So what's happening is that there is this conflict that causes the government to say, okay, we need to make sure our citizens don't attack each other. We need to make sure they're safe. We need to come to a general consensus, this sort of squeezing the ball until they're just one mass of people. It is very much so an inner consolidation of power. And what I explain to people that are from Russia and China when they ask me about the US media, I say, listen, you can build 10 more RTs. You can build a million more Chinese broadcast channels. That won't help you in
Mhm.
the information war with the United States. I
Yeah.
said because it's not about news channels for them. The foreign policy of the United States is mixed into every show that we have on television. It's mixed into 98% of the movies that touch a screen. You're sitting through propaganda literally every day of your life, and you just don't notice it.
Yeah, what was so interesting about like mainstream media? I think people equate like CNN with a liberal news as being a liberal news source. And I just remember when Elon Musk, gave his heart to the crowd. I was watching two CNN pundits talk about it, and they're supposed to be like adversarial to the right. Let's just say reductively, and they're like, "Oh, well, what was that? Oh, we knew what that was. Our audience is smart, and they can make their own decisions about what that was. It's just not a gesture you generally see in American politics." And I was like getting a flashback to like a 1930s like history class about how like the liberal media was completely walked hand in hand into fascism with the Nazis.
I think what also is interesting is that the people that I've met that are liberals, they think that their left is the problem. They think
Yeah.
the people that are left of me are the problem. And what I've noticed about liberals is that they fight hardest against those people. They're willing to fight harder against those people because realistically speaking, Greg, those people want to change the world. The Republicans that they're supposed to be fighting against want to keep the world exactly the same way as it is now, with the balance of power always being one way or the other. But the new right is different than the old right. They're the
Yeah.
paleo conservatives. They see it as a religious struggle against evil, right? And I think when it comes to cultural politics, right? When it comes to these culture wars that keep getting brought up, and people ask me, well, how do you feel about, oh, these trans people, these other people come to my page and ask me all kinds of crazy stuff. And I
Mhm.
always say to them, I say, oh, you know what's interesting? Let's talk about that for a second. Identifying as something that you think people can clearly see. Because this is your point, I'm saying. I have people on the right that I've been friends with for years. They didn't start out on the right. That's kind of where they ended up. And
Mhm.
I don't banish these people out of my life. I mean, I take them less seriously when they say things like Joe Biden's a communist. Yeah, one point
Yeah.
less than 1% for infrastructure. He's a real fucking Joseph Stalin, you moron. Anything left of the hunting the homeless for sport is now socialism. You that leadless pencil of an imagination is what you got. So by the time I'm done with them, other people are like, all right, when you talk to him, you gotta read a book first. You can't just talk to him like that. So I say to them, look, you're being fed this idea that this is some massive culture war. Oh, these identifications. Okay, I got a better identification for you. When Russian crude, right, that
Mhm.
Europe was screaming about India and the rest of Latin America, you people are animals, you're supporting the war in Ukraine. Okay, when Russian crude, which is 90% of what Europe leaves on, goes
Mhm.
into a substation in Poland or Romania and it's processed there, it gets to identify as NATO fucking processed oil. It gets to identify as European Union processed oil.
Mhm.
When a European comes to the United States and says, hey, I've been here for 12 minutes and now I'm an American and I'm more American than the people that have been here for thousands of years because I identify as an American, that to me is more destructive to our society than children that are going through some human issue. And look, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not here to comment
Mhm.
on what gender issues are. To be honest, I tell people that what I see as an infiltration of government is when they tell you anything about sexuality. And what I see that's different about religion is this idea that God created the universe, right? That he made the stars, the planets, he made galaxies and all these places, right? And he's really, really concerned with this one little planet where this one little hominid is living. And he's so focused on what that hominid does when the lights go out and they're under the covers. You think God has time for this shit? Do you think God, while he's building a supernova, has time to wonder if you sucked a cock in your life? Do you think God gives a fuck about that? Because if he doesn't, he's not God. He is what we call
Big
a
brother.
no, it's
Yeah.
like I'm looking for the word inexact, but basically it's an anthropomorphization of God.
Yeah.
It's giving
Uh,
human characteristics to something that doesn't have human characteristics. So it's like Tony, that you've turned God into Tony the tiger, right? A tiger that talks and acts like a person. So you believe that God now is this anthropomorphic image of what you say it is. Because in the Bible, there are so many things that we can bring up in terms of how one conflicting image is stuck on politics. Jesus Christ himself said it's easier for a camel to walk through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven.
right.
So it
And of
wasn't
course,
like he was against class warfare.
yeah, no, he absolutely was, which is why he was executed by the state. And I'm glad you brought that up because when it comes to this identity politics, it doesn't originate, from necessarily the right or the Republicans or the GOP and their mouthpieces. Because I remember watching a rally for Hillary's campaign in 2016. She had this infamous quote, and I think they just replayed it on Breaking Points recently. And it's about class warfare because they really started this like identity politics to block actual progressive left movements. Because she said,
Mm.
we could vote for Bernie Sanders. We can regulate and take it to the bankers, but is that going to solve racism? Is it going to solve sexism? No. And and that one quote was like the entire encapsulation of why she lost to Trump. And now I'm just saying the Trump thing, the Trump camp doing the same sort of thing. So with their campaign against DEI, which was another iteration of their war against wokeism, COVID-19, which was an iteration of their war against critical race theory, starting all the way
Right.
back with Black Lives Matter. So. Yeah, it's both sides, both like what we would call centrist or center right, which I think we both agree would liberals fall into, and the actual MAGA world. They're doing the same exact thing. Anything to not talk about class.
And I think that there's one more thing that we have to bring up, and I know a lot of people that, let's say that they're very offended by what MAGA does. They see you and I criticizing the Democratic Party as not helping. But I always tell
Mhm.
people that these criticisms don't come from a place of ingrained hatred. They come from a place where you see someone and you realize that their potential is much higher than what it is and that they've wasted their fucking life. And essentially, that's what I see when I see liberals, because the definition of a modern American liberal to me, and I hope the ones that are watching your show take this personally, because this message is for you. The definition of a liberal to me is a person who supports every struggle for freedom, except the one that's going on right now.
They're
And that's
against
exactly who
every
they've been.
war. They're against every war except the one right now.
So that's their premise. They're such humanitarians, and even the people on the so-called left that are now crying on camera because of immigrants, right? I didn't see you shed a tear over 30,000 dead children. Now, mind you, there are a lot of immigrant children that have died crossing in the desert. I worked with a group called Border Kindness and other people that left water for individuals that are out in the desert. And I went there myself, and I've seen, the remnants of where people camped out there. I've seen a little girl's sandal and a covered in blood. I saw a little kid's backpack with a stab mark in it. I've seen all kinds of shit in those deserts that make me think, yeah, this is anyone that has to do this or does this in life. You can't do anything but have a profound respect for them. Also, something to be brought up for those people say, oh, these Mexicans are running across the border. No, they're crawling through the desert at night, because I went through that desert. And me, in good shape at the time I was, man, I didn't make it more than what, a few miles into that desert before the whole group said, listen, the group leader says, we left the water where it is, we got to turn back. And I said, yeah, we do. Because it's 120 fucking degrees out here. And he said, plus,
Mhm.
we're not going to see any of the people that we're helping, because they don't travel during the day. They only travel at night because they can't travel during the day. It's physically impossible to move 50 miles in this sun. You
Mhm.
cannot do it. You know what I mean? I think that as a person who served in the Middle East, there's a big difference between Iraq and Afghanistan. But the people who have been in Iraq will tell you, hey, man, if they let you loose in that desert, no MRE, no water, you're done by the end
Mhm.
of 2 days. 2 days, you tops three, maybe. You're done. And these people are going through that with no MRE, drinking whatever people leave for them. So I've seen the reflection of that. And what I think is telling now is that this government is doing what all authoritarian governments do. It's testing its system on the people with the least amount of political representation. So
Mhm.
immigrants and minorities. You think they're going to test it on white Americans first? No, you're
No,
last. You're
you know
last, but you're
that
next, right?
that's that's kind of the entire premise of this podcast when we first started it at Colonial Outcast. It's like, look, teaching white people about why white supremacy is bad for them too. It's like it's not going to affect you now. It's going to start on the reservation, and then the black communities, the immigrants, and then finally it's going to work its way up to you. And you're not going to be black, or you're not going to be an immigrant, but you will be an enemy of the state, and you're
Right,
going.
because of something you said, because of the First Amendment. And the people who did that to you were not trans people, they were not black people, they were not Latino people, they were not immigrant activists. The people who curtail your freedom of speech are not left wingers. That's what I keep telling people. And when I see people saying, "Oh, it's the left that's doing censorship," no, it's the Democratic Party, which is the center right party. Every time I've ever met a person who's a true leftist or a socialist or something, they welcome debate, because there's so much to pick from in dealing with this government. And unlike, let's say, those people from a Prager University that cherry pick, 17-year-old children to have a debate with, like, yeah, okay, dude, I could battle, high school kids with a Fisher Price mic, and I could look stunning too. But the reality is that they're offering no solution, and they're telling people that someone else is responsible for our censorship of you, when in reality I'm responsible for the censorship. In the same way that's like, I can't give veterans money because I gave it to these immigrants. Well, you print trillions of dollars a year, so you're telling me that the 100 million, it's like if I had $2,000 in my pocket, and I said, this guy said, hey man, you owe me $1 from yesterday. And I said, oh Jesus Christ, I don't have that money for you. I gave your dollar to Willie on the corner. And now I direct my friend that I owe $1 to me, to Willie, and say, yo, in order to get your money, you're gonna have to beat the shit out this homeless dude that have no rights, that has no protection under the law. So he's an easy victim for them, right? But that's how it's always been in the United States, the deflection of who's to blame. For example, let's say the right wing is successful. Let's say they implement what they want, Greg. Let's say they get everything right, and it
Mm-hmm.
still fails. And it still fucking fails. Their economic system is a house of cards, not because it looks like a house of cards, but because it is one, right? Everything falls apart. Who are they going to blame, Greg? Are they going to blame themselves? No, they'll blame communism and the
Yeah,
left. It's always been their easy out. Right wingers, to me, their kryptonite has always been accountability. Because rather than take accountability for the Iraq war, they hid behind Donald Trump's skirt. See, the truth about a lot of Republicans that I'm going to say is this, and I'm going to look deep into the camera so I can look into their souls.
Yeah, send it.
You people rubbed your pussy to dead children for 15 years. You know that? You rubbed your pussy to dead children for 15 years. You watched war porn, right? And you thought it was cute and sexy, and we backed President Bush no matter what, right? You are ungodly people. And the truth is that you didn't come to this part of the world to worship Jesus, right? You tried to turn yourselves into God. You tried to manipulate his image. And that is the reason, ladies and gentlemen, that's the real reason that Christ has abandoned you. And now you're sitting here blaming everybody else for your problems, but you giving a blank check to killing children in the place of the birth of the prophet Abraham is the reason that God has abandoned you. Not because your son decided to wear a dress, not because you let immigrants into the country, not because people want to worship Islam. The funny thing about Muslims that I know is they're waiting on Jesus too. If you read the Quran, at the end of the Quran, it says that the Prophet Muhammad is in heaven with God. Peace be unto him. It says, doesn't say he's coming back. It says in order to destroy the false prophet and Dajjal, right, and Shaitan, that the prophet Isa returns. And ladies and
Mm-hmm.
gentlemen, the prophet Isa is Jesus. So Muslims, ladies and gentlemen, are waiting on Jesus because supposedly a regular man is not going to be able to handle Shaitan. How could he? A talking monkey is going to fight against the most powerful angel in heaven? But no, Jesus is coming back and he's going to wreck shop. And he's also going to have to wonder about, what is this humanity that I'm fighting for? A
Yeah.
group of people
Well,
that are consistently
yeah.
conquering each other.
I mean, hopefully, though, if Jesus does come back, if when, he's not shot by some right wing cops for giving meals to the homeless.
I mean, I think Jesus, if we saw him in the modern era, would be like a Dominican dude that flipped out at Chase Bank. You know what I mean? And
Yeah, I mean,
or
yeah.
he went into
No
Citibank and was
tables
like,
to flip over,
this
so I'm
is a
just gonna yell at the
lie.
killer. Yeah, but I just wanted to bring this a kind of it's not necessarily a non sequitur, but I don't know if you saw this image. This is a paper mache goat with Donald Trump bills that's now presented at Mar-a-Lago. This should be on display at every MAGA church. And I just made the comment, when you're a Christian who's never actually read the Bible, under capitalism, the golden calf has transformed into a paper mache money goat. It's like they're so detached from from
Well,
like
listen,
anything.
I think one of the most interesting things I learned, or I read in the Bible, because I tell people, unlike a lot of people who claim some affinity for the left or understanding of that, I always tell people, I don't know why, but I've always had faith. I've always had belief. And I always said that I can look at it from a scientific perspective too. My father was a physicist. He don't believe in God, but even he is forced to acknowledge that if we apply Isaac Newton's laws of physics to certain things, they work on regular everyday objects. A ball going down, and an object stays in motion until an opposing force acts upon it. I think that these things are regular with a car, with other stuff. But if you take them to the subatomic level or the planetary level, these numbers don't add up. There's something there in the universe that we're missing. And to me, I've never found those things incompatible. And my biggest gripe with a lot of the left is that you people surrendered God. You surrendered moral bankruptcy. You surrendered it because you were afraid of being seen as a zealot and a freak. And at the end of the day, I remind those people, your religion is not what you believe in. Your religion is what you do. Your faith is what you believe in. Your religion is what you do. So if you walk in the path of
Hmm.
Jesus, or you walk in the path of a righteous person and you happen to be Muslim, then that's your life. But if you are a karate instructor, if you claim to be a karate instructor and you get into a fight with a person that don't know how to fight and they wipe you out, you're not a martial arts expert. You're not a karate instructor, bro. You're a liar. And in this case, that same logic is not applied to a person that claims to love life and care about people and love the stranger. And if Jesus was born today, he would be born in a Mexican hoopty, in a modern day manger. And I think that that's what we're discussing. We're saying, hey, if the Savior does come back, do you think he comes back as some rich, pampered kid in society? Or is this a Siddhartha story? Because that's the other aspect of it. If we're looking at religious comparisons, that's who Buddha was. He didn't come from
Yeah.
a shit like I'm living in complete shit here. The Romans are killing children. No, Buddha was born to a life of luxury. Buddha was born in Siddhartha's palace where his father wouldn't let him see old people. And the story of Buddha is very different, where he says, no, I reject all this. And he sees an
Mhm.
old man and he doesn't even know what the old man is in the story. He goes, what are you? He goes, I'm what happens when people get old. I've never seen that. My father's never allowed me to see that. And in many ways, the reason I bring this up is because to most Americans, whether they know it or not, your daddy's like the government. And he's never let you see the things that are actually out there. He's never let you
Yeah.
see an old person. You are Siddhartha. You're living in this magical place that if you think this place is ghetto, and I remind my cousins and everybody else, oh, this is so ghetto. Yeah? I'll take you to Peru, where we come from, bro. You'll see
No.
ghetto. There's running water in them projects. There's actually walls that connect, right? The food that people eat outside is actually food. It's not like in Peru where people are starving and they make these little dishes where they have like ground beef and they put cardboard in it to fatten it up. And this is what the rest of the world is living through: ultimate
Yeah.
poverty. And
No, I mean,
when
I was exposed to that on a real level. I lived in Mumbai for a while, and
oh shit, wow,
yeah, so yeah,
extreme poverty.
extreme, like like 1,000-year generations of just abject poverty too. And
I went
yeah,
to a
oh,
No, I
sorry,
was
go
gonna
ahead.
say just to add to that, one of the places that opened my eyes to that and just showed me the resilience of people is I went to Haiti after the earthquake in 2010
Oh
with a group
shit.
of
Okay.
people, arms around Haiti and hip hop for Haiti. And I just wanted to bring two things up for that. The reason I'm bringing this up is because one, the people's spirit of resilience really inspired me because I saw people digging their own people out the rubble before the UN got there. I saw them
Mm,
uniting in groups of people. And, you know, I know that Wyclef's organization, Yele, got a lot of heat, but I personally saw him invite like child care specialists and other people to Haiti. And he had 30 orphans from Port-au-Prince and Delma and the surrounding area that were living in his compound. And it touched my heart so much because there was a little girl who could not have been older than 9 years old, Greg. And there was a baby that was crying and crying and crying. And yo, this is the only time I really wanted to cry on that trip, Greg, is that I saw this little girl who was 9 years old and she cut a hole. She cut a hole in her shirt and she put a bottle through it so she could fool the baby into thinking that she had milk coming from her. And the baby finally ate. And I saw those people and they we did a show with them. Me, Wyclef, Styles P, and a rapper called Cormega. I love these brothers, man. For the rest of my life, they're such kind-hearted people. And Jerry Wonder was there back in the day when him and Clef were still on good terms. I hope they get back there too. But the other thing I wanted to bring up is that the people use music to take it full circle back to where we started, to express what goes on in the community. And there was an independent artist that had a song. I wish I remembered his name, but the song was called, the chorus of the song was Où est les enfants? Où est les enfants? The
Where are
thing
the
has come down. Où est les enfants? Right. They said that, and in the song they were saying that people were taking children out of the rubble and they disappeared. And everyone thought this was just, oh, this is just whatever it is. It's that, it's that. Okay, cool. And only 1 year later, Greg, we come to find out that there were massive amounts of human trafficking in
Mhm.
Haiti, that there was massive amounts of money laundering through not just the Clinton Foundation, but you have right-wing Christian organizations that did the same thing. We focus a lot on the Clintons, and they deserve to get their due for what they've done, 100%. But they're not the only ones that are in cahoots.
They're not the only
Sucking
ones.
the blood out of Haiti. Right. So I think in that sense, it brings us full circle to the sense of where we are right now in this country. Right. We're going through one catastrophe after another, and I just foresee we'll have more of these cataclysmic events of earthquakes and tsunamis and stuff like that. But I think that so we don't focus on those things, we have these outer conflicts that consistently happen, and the rich are getting ready to survive what comes.
Yeah, I mean
But
they're building their bunkers, and these outer conflicts. I mean, this is something I talk about often because I usually focus on foreign policy more so than domestic policy. But
mm,
one of the main things that I say we as like I call it the MIMAC, the military industrial media and academic complex, because they all work together. So like the media aspect is to create enemies and light fires all throughout the globe for interventionist reasons, to get us focusing on the enemy without instead of the enemy within, which is a conspiratorial government with the ruling class. And so like right now, we're trying to manufacture conflicts with
mm.
Iran potentially. Now you have Trump saying that we're going to ethnically cleanse Gaza. I've done episodes on this. It's not feasible. Jordan would collapse. Egypt would collapse, etc. We've already talked about it ad nauseum. But what's interesting right now is that I feel like as an imperial state, the imperialism, because there's not the same consent as there were, like as there was in the post 9/11 era, like for actual direct intervention wars, like U.S. boots on the ground, that no longer exists. And also, there's disillusionment with the war in Ukraine. Like we spent like hundreds of billions of dollars on that for what it now seems like it's going to end as a frozen conflict with Russia in control of serious territory in the Donbass. So what was that for? What was the 20 years of the global war on terror for?
We
And
gave
even
the Afghanistan back to the Taliban 100%. Yeah. We've
yeah,
come full circle with that.
yeah, come full circle. And now I just don't see like the media and academic complexes able to manufacture public consent for imperial wars anymore. Of course, there's going to be corporate raiding.
Right.
Trump has just via executive order made bribing foreign politicians legal again. Essentially, that's kind of reductive when it comes to the bill. But I think the imperialism is going to turn inward now on our own people because there's not anything to really do. Like we can't fight China over the Strait of Taiwan. Invading Iran and fighting Iran is completely strategically infeasible. So like, what else are we going to do? Like we have to focus this energy somewhere. So I think like now the new enemy has become in a very militarized way, obviously immigrants, undocumented workers, and now it's just going to work its way up the social ladder towards everybody who is just an enemy of the state now. And I don't know if you saw this article now. Speaking of that, The Intercept broke this yesterday. ICE wants to know if you're posting negative things about it online. ICE wants to hire contractors to monitor social media for threats. Those who criticize the agencies could be pulled into the dragnet. Hi, my name's Greg Stoker. I used to have a top secret security clearance. I'm very deep in the system, and fuck ICE. You can waste your time building a dossier on me if you need to.
I think the other part that I is sad is that there are right wingers who think that that's a win. They're like, "Oh yeah, that's a win," when really that goes against all the principles that they claim to be standing for. And that's why I never listen. I get it. Some activists, they come to me, they say, "I don't owe these people an explanation about racism. I don't owe them this. I don't owe them that." I say, "Listen, I can't speak for you, brother, sister. You do what you want to do. My thing is this: if I go out into the world, I remember the story of Jonah. Jonah was the person that rejected what God told him. God said, "Hey, go talk to these people." He said, "No, I won't. These people are crazy. They're going to kill me." And he goes through this whole ordeal. But the thing that was inspiring me about the story is that when he was on the ship, he got on the ship and he escaped. And there were sharks in the water. God sent storms. The ship was about to capsize. And they thought it was other people. And so they were going to throw this other man in the water. And Jonah steps up and he says, "No, no, no, it's me. I'm the one. It's my fault. It's my fault. I didn't listen to God. Throw me in the water, and I tell you God is real. Throw me in the water, and everything will dissipate." And so when they throw him in the water, everything dissipates. And when his ordeal is over, he goes to this town and preaches. Now, I think what's interesting about the story is, imagine if you were on a boat and you were going through a torrential storm, and a guy gets there and he says, "Listen, God is real." And you're like, "Shut the fuck up, dude. Listen, I don't know what you're on." And he goes, "No, seriously, throw me in the water and everything's going to change." If he threw you in the water and everything changed, you would go back to that town, especially in like 300 AD, with a completely different mentality. And when he finally got to this town, no wonder that they were willing to hear the word of God. My point in saying all this is we have to, whether it comes from a Bible story or it comes from our personal experience, we have to embrace that courage to say, "Look, we're going to talk about this." Just like you said right now, my name is Greg, fuck ICE. My name is Felipe Coronel, fuck ICE. It's not the question that we're we're sitting here bucking the system because we want to feel like counterculture. It's because these individuals that think they're counterculture on the right wing are banging on the door of authoritarianism. Authoritarianism is not synonymous with communism. Communism is capable of authoritarianism just as much as capitalism is capable of authoritarianism or any other political system that's implemented to control people. And I think when we look at it, that's always been my issue debating with Marxists. I say, look, as an indigenous person, that comes from Peru, I've seen the implementation of left-wing systems that don't function and seek to disenfranchise indigenous people of their land. So my response to them is, look, Marx and Adam Smith both agreed on something. They agreed that there were only two classes. So as much as these people were ideologically opposed to each other, Marx and Adam Smith were both like, yeah, there's only the people that produce and the people that work. There is no the middle class is a figment of your imagination. And when you touched on COVID was the fuller soap that revealed all this, to say the least. Because during COVID, you realized, hey, there really are only two classes. You middle class people, 80% of the cars on the road in America are not owned. So if you don't make payments, we're coming to take that house back. You can't work. We don't care. We're coming to take your house back. All of these things that people think are wicked and come from socialism and communism, you can find in any aspect of capitalism, which is why when I tell people, look, Marx, I liked some of the things that he had to say in his book, but the reality is this, is that I didn't need, and my people didn't need, a European guy from the 1850s to come to the dark jungles of Latin America and Africa and teach us the complex concept of sharing. We knew what that was for thousands of years.
I've never heard it articulated that way. That's fucking hilarious.
But that's my point. It's like we had these systems. If you look at Marx's history, he borrowed this from a lot of different places, right? There's also some connection between Marxism and communism because the people who wrote the Communist Manifesto, or Marxism and Zionism, because the people who wrote the Communist Manifesto were obviously Karl Marx and Frank Engels, but they were connected by a certain man. And this man actually introduced them to each other. And the man's name is Moses Hess. And I tell people he's an incredibly important person to study because he wrote the definitive book on proto-Zionism. It's called and Jerusalem. And people always bring up Theodore Herzl when they discuss Zionism, but he was a writer, right? He was a writer that wrote Feuilleton in France. And for the people who don't know what Feuilleton is, it's like page 6. He wrote gossip columns. That's what Theodore Herzl was doing before he met Moses Hess, before he became a
Mhm.
student of Moses Hess. And when you look at it, he's basically like the godfather. He's not the father of modern day Zionism, but it was and definitively always will be interpreted as a colonial ideology, a colonization ideology, which is why it's so important to listen and to read the writings of people that you may fundamentally disagree with. Like, for example, you and I both don't like neocons. Who's the
Mhm.
father of modern neoconservative thought? Well, Leo Strauss, right? Leo
Mhm.
Strauss is a Straussian. All of the people, Wolfowitz, the rest of them, the entire Bush cabinet, they came from a Straussian philosophy of thought. And
Yeah,
Strauss
and
relies
I'm
heavily on,
wondering.
sorry, last part. Strauss relies heavily on Plato's The Republic. And the point of The Republic means that you need one incredibly important lie. Even if it's based on some kernel of truth, it has to be an exaggeration for people to accept the state as it is and think any alteration of that is a deviation from perfection. That's all I was going to say. Sorry.
Yeah, no. They also like worked at that. What was that? Project for a New American Century think tank
Right.
as well, where all of those neocon ideas started to like take a nascent shape. And yeah, this has been building like for a long time. Project 2025 didn't just like come out of nowhere. And like before we like end, I just kind of like want to touch on one thing that we talked about prior to actually beginning recording, and that was the government infiltration of the music industry and the arts in
Mm.
general, movie as well. And we were talking about USAID, and I was wondering if you just wanted to touch on that at all.
Me personally, I don't think I was ever approached because people know what time it is with me,
Hmm.
and I think that it's not that the people that they picked are stupid people. That some of them are really smart, educated people. I think though that some of them are aware of what they're doing, but some of them, I would say, the vast majority of them are unaware that they're participating in this. They see it as some cultural exchange program. The government sees it as a way to expand our ideology to other countries, to expand our way of thinking, to make people assimilate to our economic system. That's what they want.
Hmm.
And I think that in the case of bringing someone like me there, I'm going to point out things that other people, maybe either don't want to discuss or don't want to do. Like whether it's one country or another, you're always going to find something that someone has missed, and that's why I think when it comes to USAID and it comes to these infiltrations, they rely on artists because they're creative people and they're able to see things that other people can't see. Like they look at markings on a wall. Like if I just take my hand and throw paint on a white wall, that means nothing to most people. But someone else can say, wait a minute, no, 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 no. I connect these dots. This is a masterpiece. I can know this is the skeleton of a masterpiece. So if you just put a few notes together, you say dun dun dun, right? It means nothing. But if I put them in succession, and just put a rest between them. Because if you study music, and most artists are not musicians, the rest is just as important as the note. So if you put the rest between them instead of putting them in random order, it becomes then, 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 then. Dun, 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 dun. It's just easy. It comes from a place that other people can't see. So when I look at music, the way a physicist looks at numbers, I would tell my dad, I don't have the gift you have. I can't see equals MC squared in the scrolling of that. And I always felt like a failure because of it. And my
Hmm.
dad pulled me aside and he said, no, you're not a failure, my son. I'm very proud of you. You can see things that other people can't see in terms of music. And I think for that creative element, the government wants to employ people. But the most important thing that they have is not their skill. It's their level of competency and dedication to the mission. So as a former military person, you'll know that commanders typically like, sure, we like people that are focused, but if we have a guy who's unreliable and a guy who's off the handle and doesn't know how to follow orders, we don't want you on the team. I'll take someone with slightly less skills than you, right? That does whatever the fuck I tell you, because I don't
Yeah,
need someone questioning
100%.
my commands in the middle of it. I don't need someone getting a conscience in the middle of it. I also don't need someone killing indiscriminately, bringing heat to an operation where we're only supposed to target 12 people. And you come home and there's 400 people dead. What the fuck are you doing, dude? So I think that at that point, we're looking at the massive restructure of how our society is trying to export its ideology, not through conquest, but through saying, hey man, this song is incredible. Wouldn't you want to be part of a world like this? And I'll go in there, some jerk off like me will come into the thing and be like, there's a genocide in this country that we're about to perform in, right? And we're not going to talk about it. We
Mhm.
supported the rebels that knocked this thing over. We're not going to talk about it. You invite me on RT. I don't mind having conversations with the Russians, but I say, hey, your man Putin's a chess player. When he's in Europe, he supports the far right, the farthest of the far right. Marine Le Pen, the guy in
Mhm.
Hungary, everybody else that hates immigrants, all these people. But when he comes to Latin America, who does he support? What people interpret as
The
the far left,
Yeah.
Cuba, China, whatever it is. So
The
when I hear people
Maduro.
cheering
Yeah.
him on the right wing, I'm always laughing because I'm like, oh yeah, you're cheering Putin, but yet you hate Venezuela, you hate Cuba, and these entities and these countries would not exist without his direct interference. Let's keep it 1,000. The economies of these nations would not be able to sustain themselves without the direct interference of Russia and China because of the embargo, because the United States decided long ago that there would never be a South American Union. The only reason the European Union is allowed to exist is because of NATO. And that means that we, as Americans, have never really looked at World War II because we imagine, oh, Europe's at war with itself. No. World War II was the United States and the UK and Russia against damn near everyone in Europe. And let's go down the line. Spain, Franco, fascist, allied to Hitler but
Mhm.
claimed he wasn't helping him, right? Then Salazar in Portugal,
Yeah.
fascist, right? Right-wing fascist, allied to Hitler but claimed he wasn't helping him. France, Marshal Pétain, allied to
Yeah.
Hitler.
Fucking
Mussolini, allied to. Let's not
Yeah.
get into Ukraine because they had a homegrown division of SS people. Austria, Poland. Which one do you want me to go for? It's the entirety of Europe, and that's why when they got their shit knocked over, right? The United States says, "Sure, we'll allow you to come back together again, but now you work for me." And essentially, the
Mhm.
United States does that. That's why I always tell people Israel is a colony of the United States. Israel, it takes orders from what the United States does, not the other way around. We have
I
18
can't. Yeah.
bases in it. We have 18 bases in Israel, and we help them to maintain their nuclear arsenal. So when you look at the transparency of what we're supposed to have as citizens and see what our supposed tax money is being wasted on or whatnot, what we actually have to confront is the idea that what we see as the world and everything that's in it is really just a map of resources for these large nations, and they're in constant competition for them because there's a limited amount of that stuff. Now they're going to come get them one way or another, and what we misunderstand is the things that rule those resources. So dictatorship is actually a legal position within a republic,
Mhm.
when the government is in complete danger. And that's always associated with the right wing when it shouldn't be. It's just a legal position of government that's consistently abused, though, right? Nationalization. By far, people always associate this with communism. It has very little to do with that, actually. It has to
Mhm.
do with it's parts of nationalization are actually born out of capitalism. They're saying, wait a minute, the previous administration signed a faulty deal. So let's say that you're Peru and I'm the country, the corporation of Odebrecht. And I come in and I make a deal with you, Greg, and I say, listen, your administration is going to get $2 billion in funding from me for your own little private fucking projects. And I get access to these materials, tin, copper, sulfur, sulfide, all these other things. And plus, there's now whetstone that's rumored to be in the Amazon. So we want your uranium deposits as well. Boom. Okay, let's make a deal. Then someone else comes in. Greg Stoker Jr., your son, his totally different ideology about how we're going to run this thing. No, I want to nationalize those resources. Not because we've decided to keep them all for ourselves. See, that's diversion into a different political ideology. That's taking
Mhm.
it out of nationalism. Now you're talking about socialism, but nationalization on its own could exist in any government, even a capitalist government, which it has multiple times. The capitalist government says, wait a minute, Mr. Greg signed a bad deal because he was getting kickbacks. His son doesn't want to be that way. So Greg Jr. says, no, fuck you. We're nationalizing everything. We'll put it back on the market. Now give me fair wage for this. You're not going to have me like Niger, right, who was
Mhm.
paying 50 cents per ounce of uranium, when on the open market it goes for $225. The French were raping these people. And
Yeah.
so that's why after Prigozhin was killed, you and I discussed this before the show, right? On our first phone call, half
Mhm.
the troops didn't go to Belarus. They went to fucking Africa. Why? Because Africa is the breadbasket for Europe. It's still been. And when you
Yeah.
think about dictatorships, everyone thinks China, America supports the most. No, it's France. So they can get access to Africa's infinite wealth. Africa is not poor. My African brothers and sisters, you are not poor. You have some of the richest resources on earth. Do not fall for the okey doke. You're not poor. Your leadership is corrupted. That's it. And when they went there, they cut off the supply line. Why? Because Putin and the rest of them must have read a book and said, how was Napoleon defeated when he had superior numbers? His supply lines were cut. He could no longer feed 625,000 people. That's why he crawled back into France with less than 150,000 men. He lost 500,000 people in that campaign.
Yeah.
People who read history.
Actually, now that you brought it up, I just want to make a note for the audience that we are going to be reorienting a lot of focus towards Africa, especially like the Sahel area. A lot's going on, and it's ignored. It's completely ignored by any sort of mainstream media. You're talking about the Russians in Africa. Yeah, the Wagner Group is doing counter-terror operations in Mali. Yeah, come on, dude.
Yeah,
So
they're there to remove the French and to remove the French mercenaries that are there, so that those resources go back on the market. The only difference is I know the Russians. The Russians are going to have it back on the market when it comes to them. It comes to them first, and they get first right of refusal. Now, it doesn't mean the market's closed for anybody else, but if the market pays in any currency that you want, it's no longer an American market. The way that American markets are defined in many ways are not just that they're controlled because the hegemonic view of the region is allied to the United States. No, it's because they trade in dollars. What the West Africans are trying to do is say, no, 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 we'll take your any currency. Like, come on, come to us. Come to us. Let's open for business, right? The United States takes every currency. Why can't I? Why can't I take Indian money for the metals that I have? Why can't I take Chinese money for the metals I have? Then, when it comes to these programs where people offer you millions of dollars, I got money in your fucking in your government's economic structure. So therefore, I can come and do business in your country. So I can now buy the raw resources or materials that I don't have available in Africa, or the machines that are being built in other countries. I can buy those from India. I can buy those from Russia. I can buy those from the United States. I can buy those from Europe. And I think one thing that we don't discuss enough is that this country consistently uses proxies to fight these wars. And that's
Mhm.
what we're going to see more of in Africa. And I think if you're going to do that, it's great. I think my only suggestion would be do an entire episode on its own on AfricaCon, because that's such an interesting
Yeah.
story. Why it was
Oh
invented,
my God. Yeah.
what the
I have
history
friends.
of it is, right?
Yeah. I have friends that were in special forces group that were consistently deployed on AfricaCon operations. It's a completely problematic history, like any imperialist endeavor in that region. But yeah, absolutely. And you talk about proxies. I just want to say, I've been mentioning this a lot recently. I don't like the term Cold War because it's very America and Russia centric. For many people,
Mm.
because of the use of proxies of Russia and the USSR, it was very much not a Cold War. It was a hot war. This is nothing like new that the United States is doing. Use of proxy forces. Don't even want to get into like what's going on in the Congo right now, but
I
yeah,
think
I think
though.
we should. Oh, sorry. What
No,
were you
I was
saying?
going to bring up the fact that no. Only thing I was going to jump in and build off your point, and build off what you were saying, is that these proxy wars have extended, you're right, to every single conflict, and I would say including the conflict in Gaza, because the United
Yeah.
States got all of its fundamental goals out of that conflict. They don't want to destroy and eliminate the Palestinians the way that the Israelis do, because they're a threat to their identity, right? The people who actually live there are a threat to the identity of
Mhm.
Europeans who have come there and identified as if they were Mizrahi. Sure, there were always Jewish people in Palestine, but they were
Mhm.
Mizrahi Jewish people. The Ashkenazi migration doesn't begin until maybe the 17th century, and that is an extremely small numbers of people. We're
Yeah.
talking about dozens. We're not talking about anything else, and it doesn't even get to a point where we have any structure until now. The reason I bring that up is because the United States has fundamentally abused that proxy mechanism in the Middle East multiple times. And for the people that, I'll just give a brief example. We got to see the Reagan memoirs where he was talking about, he was calling African leaders monkeys. He was saying all this racist stuff. But in the middle of it, there were some gold nuggets that we caught. The way that he mentioned that he didn't care whether Iran or Iraq won the war, that he wanted to
Mhm.
make sure none of them were a regional power. Why? Because only my proxy can be the regional power. So just a quick hint: when Iraq was still kind of in the U.S. camp, when Saddam was in conflict, in open conflict with Iran, he actually
Mhm.
bought a nuclear reactor from France that the United States didn't have the power to disallow. He wanted to convert power to nuclear power because he could get cheap uranium from countries that he was allied to in Africa, and therefore save all of his resources on coal and on oil to be able to sell, right?
Mhm.
So what happened? The United States couldn't hit Saddam because the United States was allied with Saddam in its war against Iran. So what did the United States do? The United States gave the coordinates of the nuclear reactor to
To
Israel, and
Israel.
Israel bombed the nuclear reactor. But it was because Reagan wanted them to. So let's analyze Gaza for a second. What did they want? They wanted them to turn their back on Iran, right? They didn't. Israel wants to destroy them. America wants to take you over and make you fight for them like the Romans, right? We're in conflict with China. Our biggest political partner is the person we dropped a nuclear weapon on, right? We're in conflict with some people in Europe who don't see things our way. Who's our biggest supporter? The country that we ripped in fucking half and killed most of the people in there, Germany, right? So whoever we conquer, it's not like we do it just to decimate you or rip you to pieces. No, we do it to crack you and make you work for us now. And that is the premise of what they're trying to do in the Middle East. Their premise was to get rid of Hezbollah, but has not succeeded. But they've definitely fractured it in Lebanon. It still exists in Lebanon, but not to the same degree as it did before. But it still exists now in Syria and Iraq. What happened with Syria? We wanted that country since the Obama administration, probably before that. We
Mhm.
squeezed on Ukraine so hard that the Russians were forced to let go. And what ended up happening is that they were able to decimate them. And then they've lined up the rest of the Middle East to only buy weapons from them. So what has essentially happened? The United States has now fought these proxy wars consistently through not just its ally in Israel, but its compromised Middle Eastern governments that it says, hey, listen, you want to keep your status? Don't do anything. Complain, talk shit, maybe go on a couple of shows, The King of Jordan, so you can seem like you're against it. But you know what I mean? Maybe troll out your wife so she can use her Palestinian ancestry as a way of saying that she somehow has more empathy. But this is all word salad. It's not going
Mhm.
to equate to anything other than, listen, I'm going to do what the United States says at the end of the day, because a Sisi can say, oh man, I don't want this to happen. We're not going to do this. Brother, the only reason that you're there, Habibi, is because when we got rid of Mubarak, the United States murdered Mohammed Morsi, who was a democratically elected person, regardless of how you feel about, the Muslim Brotherhood. Irrespective of that, the people elected a man. The United States removed that person and installed a military dictator. Do you think Sisi has a capacity to do that? The Egyptian military isn't structured to invade another country. It's structured to keep its own people in check. So therefore, he can
Yeah.
complain as much as he wants, but he's
And
absolutely
to
going to do nothing.
yeah,
He's not going to
and
bust a grape.
yeah, it's also structured to fight a low-grade counterinsurgency in the Sinai against Bedouin militants. So,
Right.
yeah, I thought it was really interesting when you brought up uh, the U.S. proxy relationship. Israel is that, and I kind of get tired of like the conspiracy theory that like Israel controls the United States. I mean, it's kind of has a weird dynamic in terms of other colonial projects throughout history. It's very unique in some ways, because it influences our politics so much. But it's uh, uh, I often rebel against the idea that Israel controls the United States. It's an imperial project, and I just kind of want to bring up this point. We've looked at this before. This is an analysis paper from the Brookings Institute from June 2009. Which path to Persia, and what you were bringing up about Israel bombing the Saddam's nuclear reactor kind of reminded me of this paper. So if we look at, I just want to look at the chapters. Um, okay, so like part one is dissuading Tehran, diplomatic options for dealing with a hostile Iranian government. There's persuasion, there's engagement. Part two is military options, invasion, airstrikes. And chapter 5 is my favorite. It's leave it to Bibi, allowing or encouraging an Israeli military strike. And this policy paper, the Brookings Institute, think tanks exist because not every politician or decision maker has the opportunity to be a regional expert or on any given region. So think tanks basically make these position papers for politicians and people within the government in order to make policy decisions. And so we've done episodes before about like the untold influence of think tanks that have on government policy and their complicated relationship to the military industrial complex as well. The Brookings Institute is not one of the worst ones. I think like the Atlantic Council is more hawkish than most, but this idea, the use of proxies, and the only reason I wanted to bring that up was to like give like a concrete demonstration about this relationship as Israel as our proxy within the region. It destabilizes the Middle East. It fractures all the Arab governments from uniting. And also it builds its own insurance policy where these governments can't go against Israel because it's made itself important. Sorry, I'm like blanking on the word for some reason. They need it because Israel gives them spyware and espionage equipment that they use on their own population.
There's also a really devious reason that. Do we lose you for a second?
No, I'm here. My camera's just weird.
Okay. No,
Yeah.
I was going to say also there's also a devious religious reason that we're holding on to Israel. A lot of conservative Christians in this Seven Mountains theory also believe in the rebuilding of the temple, and they believe that will bring about the return of the Messiah. The only problem is that in that same prophecy, it says that a third of all Jewish people have to die or be converted. So what I've always found very interesting about this sort of consistent fight between some elements of the Jewish community that are very concerned about anti-Semitism, their fight, they think, is with the left wing. They say, oh man, the pogroms, and listen, those people are not USSR you're dealing with here in this country. They're just angry kids that see what it is. And you being in bed as a conservative or even a liberal Jewish person with the far right, you're doing it because even though they hate Jewish people, literally, they support Israel. And that is one of the most interesting sort of dichotomies that exist in terms of how people react to Zionism, right? You have figures on the right wing that say horrific things about Jewish people, right? Way more than I've ever heard from any angry college kid who's arguing with people who are coming there to antagonize them from a Zionist side. Sure, I've heard negative things exchanged between people, but I've never heard more anti-Semitic crap come out of someone's mouth than a religious right-wing person. And realistically speaking, what I've seen from elements of the Jewish community, especially some of the more conservative elements, is that these people are willing to excuse this sort of anti-Semitism, as long as it's not too naked. When we go full Kanye with the swastika, then they can't deal with that. But the truth is that those people support Israel. They support Israel, but they don't support it for the reasons that Israelis and American Jews think. They support it because you have to die for their Messiah to come back. And I wish some of them died.
Yeah, and a lot of Zionist pragmatists know that's exactly what these evangelical Christians think of Israel, but they're completely willing to use them to further their own national agenda. That
The
being the
problem is they
unconditional
think
support of the.
they're using them. But that's the key. These people think they're using them. No,
Mhm.
you're not in charge. If you were in charge, these people would be using you. And the reason I
Mhm.
know that is because they're consistently complaining about their relationship with the United States, and the United States government doesn't complain about its relationship with Israel. People in the government complain, or in the country complain about the United States relationship with Israel. And the reason I bring that up is because when you complain, you show everybody. And I never want to dissuade people from talking about what's wrong with this country or what's wrong with anything. But I just want to bring up a logical point that if you're the one complaining about something, what you've done is indicate to every single person in the room that you're not the one in charge. Because the person who's in charge of something doesn't have to complain about something. They change it to what they want it to be because they're in charge. Now, the difficulties of changing that, sure, we can debate those. But realistically speaking, those people who have created the system have to make this image that they're also bucking the system in order to be able to implement the things that they're doing, which brings us back to our other point about how whether it's the right or the left wing, these people, or in this country, or the center right and Democrats, or the far right and Republicans, these people have to consistently form a narrative about an existential threat to the country. So, in relation to what they have to do, they both have to present this existential threat to America in order to create what you said before very poignantly, this sort of urgency that they can't sell in the media anymore, right? They can't sell 9/11 anymore. They can't, oh, it's Saddam wants to destroy us. And in the future, people aren't going to look at it like, oh, Panama wants to blow up the United States. Really, you fucking moron. This is what we're doing. We're spending $28 trillion to overthrow this country. You're out of your mind. No, we're not going to go through. But in a sense, they've both created this existential threat. The Democrats have created the existential threat that, oh man, fascism and not being able to question wars is on its way here, and it's going to happen under Republicans. And realistically speaking, we've been living under like this diet coke fascism under a democratic establishment because it is extremely, when we talked about the difference between domestic and foreign policy. The domestic policy might change slightly when Democrats come into office, sure, but realistically speaking, the foreign policy does not change. And I'll just bring up something really quick. I remember there was a lady who was running as vice president for John McCain. Her name is Sarah Palin, and there
Oh,
was
who can forget?
and she was on TV, and a guy from ABC was asking her about the Bush doctrine. And Sarah Palin, whether people like it or not, she was just not ready for that question. So liberals were laughing at her and making fun of this lady because she didn't know what the Bush doctrine was. And the thing that was most ironic to me about that, Greg, is
They
that
didn't know either.
when Obama came into power, he basically completed the Bush doctrine, which was knocking over countries that did not share our hegemonic view of the region. That was the Bush doctrine. You're either with us or you're against us. Remember that one? He was like, "Hey, you're
Yeah,
either with us or you're
yeah.
against us," and that's it. That's the
It's like
Bush doctrine.
yeah, the three pillars of the Bush doctrine are like unilateralism, preemptive war, and regime change. Obama did all that
All of
and
that
more. Yeah.
with a smile on his face. And I think what's interesting is that people thought he did all the things that John McCain was supposed to do if he had got into office. When people
Mhm.
say, oh man, John McCain is coming into office, you know what I mean? He's going to do all these things, that he's going to start another war. He's going to do this and that. And I think that the government and the people would have been less inclined to reserve their criticisms for John McCain, not just because of his color, but because of the cultural significance of the first black president, because
Mhm.
of the cultural significance that the entire Democratic Party was behind Mr. Obama. And
Yeah.
so when he committed murder, it was for a reason in a lot of liberals' minds. Like I remember during the selling of Syria during the end of the Obama presidency, there were so many pundits I seen on MSNBC, and I never forget that my good friend Dr. Cornell West, he got into an argument with a lot of them. He got into,
Mhm.
and I like Tanishi Coates, but those two I really do need to have a conversation at some point because Mr. West, Dr. West was right to criticize him at that point, saying your proximity to the White House makes you incapable of criticizing Obama for laying out the groundwork for most of these things. I mean, as much as Israel complained that Obama didn't love them, he still gave them everything that they wanted. You know, he never stopped the settlements. There's only two American presidents that have ever stopped Israeli settlements. One was Eisenhower, and the other one was George Bush Sr. And George Bush Sr. paid the price for it because he was a one-term president, and specifically the guy who ran against him. I mean, everybody talks about this, and I remember when I was a kid, and I heard that there was going to be a third-party candidate in this race. I thought to myself, wait, what is that? I asked my father, what is that? And he was like, a person who's not a Democrat or a Republican. Now, you know, as a little kid, you're kind of blown away by this. And I was like, so wait, he's not with either party, but he's going to run? And my dad explained to me as a little kid, the same way I'm kind of regurgitating for the young people that watch the show, those third-party candidates are not always there to influence the election for one side or the other, but they have been used for that in the past, which is why they get that bad reputation for being that way. That's why you'll have liberals that attack Jill Stein instead of the fundamental flaws within the Democratic Party. But they do it because there's been a time when that has been implemented. And I think Ross Perot is a perfect example. Ross Perot was a Christian Zionist, a very, very aforementioned open Christian Zionist. And he attacked George Bush on that platform. And because of his infighting, it split that party's ticket. And the person who won was a little-known Christian Zionist named William Clinton. And that's who was involved in all of these scandals in intervening in the Middle East before, and who oversaw large numbers of deportations. So I think that, to me, when you bring up what Democrats do as it correlates with what Republicans do, I think the difference is that doesn't excuse Republicans from their moral bankruptcy. So when I hear people on the right say, oh yeah, Obama built the cages, and I said, yeah, you're right,
Yeah,
he
you're
did.
fucking using them.
Right. But you're using them. So imagine,
Yeah.
I told my friend, I love this person, but they're confused. So I told him, I said, imagine if you go to court and you're part of a gang rape, and your defense to the judge is that you were the third person. That's what you're doing. Your defense up there is not that I didn't do this. It's not that I didn't partake in this heinous act. It's that I'm not the first one to do it. I said, so congratulations, you've normalized moral bankruptcy, and you've accepted it as a talking point to elude responsibility for something that Jesus would frown upon, that that the defining figure of who's supposed to be the defining figure of your movement would be thoroughly displeased with. And
it only counts if you're the first person.
So I think that, but to get into the other aspects of it, going back to George Bush and Eisenhower, and I think the difference was that Eisenhower, I think, was one of the last few presidents that held the type of power that he really did. I think I recently had a song talking about how, America's been in a soft coup ever since Kennedy died. I think that it's been an interesting conversation to have with a lot of people across the board, because they reminded me that Eisenhower, after World War II, taxed corporations to a degree of 90, in some cases 95%. So he would have been called a communist, definitely, by today's modern standards. But the difference was that he was an anti-Musk. He was like, no, you pilfer this government because you play proximity to people of power. Fuck you. Give me 90% of your takes because you were war profiteering. And some of you, Coca-Cola, Mercedes-Benz, some of you branched off into your own corporate structure so you could keep selling the enemy shit. Pay up. And he created the international highway system, not because it was beneficial for everybody, even though it turned out to be. It was because he feared a ground invasion, and he wanted to be able to transport troops better. So I think when you look at it from that particular era, you'll see how little power the president has to be able to affect those particular things. However, in Joe Biden's case, I think what drove people away from Kamala Harris and him is that they couldn't make a distinguishable difference between their human rights policies. They were people that claimed multiple times that they were working tirelessly on a ceasefire, only to find out after the election was over that they weren't working tirelessly at all, that Joe Biden is the Vinny the Chin Gigante of the Democratic Party's politics, a guy who plays a person who's physically or mentally handicapped. He plays the person that's on the door of dementia, right? Now, whether he is or not, that's up to his family to come clean with. But here's a person who methodically does things to support Israel and to support the agenda that he wants for the hegemonic view of America and the region, empire building.
Mhm.
And you think that that's happening by accident, right? You think Joe Biden didn't know that there were a trillion cubic tons of or cubic feet of natural gas in the south of Gaza? I think that the previous administrations probably briefed him on that when he came in and said, listen, we're going to set this up. You're going to knock it down. Trump's going to come in and rebuild, and we'll have access to that natural gas, which, by the way, people who have really studied it better than me expressed to me that when I asked how much and what it could do, and he said the gas that's in that natural gas field could potentially power Europe for 60 to
Yep.
80 years. And I said, six,
Hmm.
that's that much in there? He said 60 to 80 years. Now you tell me, what could a country achieve for itself in terms of its own infrastructure and advancement if it got free energy for 60 years? Oh my God. This is another light jump for the quote unquote first world developed countries and a way of leaving everybody else that's there in the dirt. And what it also explains is that Israel is going to be the regional power, not the Turks like they were fucking imagining. Sure, you're going to get a little slice of Syria back. Fine. The Saudis, as much as they invest in laser and nanotechnology, we don't want them to be a regional power. You're just going to host sporting events, motherfucker. That's how the United States sees you. Sure, you're going to host sporting events for rich people. You're not going to be the regional power. The regional power is our colony, Israel. And the
Hmm.
rest of you are going to acknowledge that and get in line with it. And I think what's developed as a course of that is that people have understood whether a Democratic president is there or a Republican president, the foreign policy does not change. So the people who naively thought, oh man, Trump is going to be different, he's going to bring peace to Israel and Palestine. Trump supporters, they have to eat their heart, but they're not going to because, like I said, accountability is kryptonite. So they'll say, oh, there's something else to blame. They'll look for excuses why he didn't do the right thing on that, which is when they turn, unfortunately, you Trump supporters, into liberals that refuse to criticize their own people. You're no different than them. You are cut from the same cloth, 100%.
Yeah. I guess. Um, yeah. No. I do really. I often talk about the American obsession with unilateralism or the being the unipolar power, and it's all from this like multi-generational foreign policy mania about national security. And they've equated that to not tolerating regional hegemons, which we do not have 100% control over. So we can't tolerate Iran. We have to tolerate China because there's no other option. But
We
yeah.
hate that India has a voice of its own, right?
Mhm.
We're mad at them and we're trying to push them into a conflict with China, which, by the way, India, who the people there, listen, some of them might be religious zealots, but they're not stupid. They know, hey, I'm not the crash test dummy for you, United
Yeah.
States. I'm not going to spend
Also, they
millions of
had.
people in this
Yeah,
war
they've also fought a border war with China, and it did not go well
multiple
for India.
times.
Yeah.
Right. And I think what they realize is, wait a minute, what we really are being done, what's really happening to us is we're being set up to take the fall and deplete their resources. Now, here's an interesting thing. I paid attention to the war in Ukraine since it started in
Hmm.
2013. I'd always been a student of like World War II history, so I realized why the Ukraine went Nazi. Fucking
Hmm.
Stalin starved these people. They were dying in droves. They felt that Hitler would be a better option. They obviously made a gigantic mistake. Their country was torn apart. And what's happened now as a result of it, and these are people who are Ukrainian people. I met them online through a series of debates, and they informed me about something really interesting, Greg. They
Okay.
said even though the United States has maintained, and they're grateful to the United States, even though they say the United States has maintained their physical sovereignty in a sense where you and me can agree that even if we don't agree with that war or the money laundering, we can say facts are facts. Without the United States interference, the Ukraine would have fell as a country a couple of years ago, perhaps, or last year. But
Mhm.
because the United States intervention is there, they've managed to be able to stifle that. The difference is this, and this is where we get to the nuts and bolts, Greg. Every aspect of that country's property is gone. The water rights have been sold off. The mining rights have been sold off. The housing situations have been sold off. The mineral exploits of whatever is there. The grain trade has been sold off.
Mhm.
Every aspect of that country has been privatized and sold off to the highest bidder, which happens to be the United
Well,
States and other
Lindsey
people there.
Graham, in an interview from like late last
I
year,
remember.
last fall,
Yeah.
you remember that one? He's like, well, we need the Donbass, that all those rare earth minerals, the lithium deposits. Like, you want Russia and China to have that? No, we need that. And of course, I'm paraphrasing, but the thing I like about politicians, right wing politicians, war hawks like Lindsey Graham, is he does say the quiet part out loud.
Right, which in a sense is probably what might actually happen. It's interesting you bring that up. I've heard that theory on the dark web already, that the reason that they came to terms is because they're going to offer the United States the idea that they'll have access through some of their companies to those resources, and in return, they're going to put a cap on the Ukraine joining NATO. So they're going to tell them, okay, you can join NATO in 40 years, but not now. So with the Republican administration, that looks like what they would do. So it looks like the new president coming in and changing the course of things. But really, you and I both know that people in the Pentagon the past few years have been saying, Jesus Christ, we're burning money. Like, dude, we're throwing money out the window at this
Yeah,
problem. It's
yeah.
not going away. We're not going to win a war against the Russians. We're not going to invade Russia. This thing is not going to turn around the way we've been telling people. It's become a meat grinder. And it's also, it's like Terminator 2 out there, bro. Like, if you remember that movie Terminator 2,
Yeah,
what
like
the machine Skynet? Who are
Skynet.
they at? Who are they at war with? Here's the crazy thing, Greg, and this is crazy to bring it up, but I talked about my friends with this so much. Skynet was already using those machines, the Terminators, on
Mhm.
other countries. They were using them, like the prototype versions of what they had. That was
Yeah.
already out there in all of the canon versions. The problem with the Terminator is that the technology turns on us,
Yeah.
right? That's the only thing that hasn't happened yet. Every other aspect of that Terminator story of using like drones who think for themselves to kill people, that's
Cyber
already in
dogs.
play.
Yeah. And, we're working on developing a new podcast called the Imperial Boomerang. It's obviously based off the theory pioneered by a lot of Caribbean intellectuals, but it basically holds that colonial forms of repression and violence through imperial feedback will be visited on the core of the empire, its own citizens. So, what is Ukraine from a military perspective? It's a massive open air weapons test, and they're developing drones. They're seeing, because nobody could have envisioned that this is what drone warfare would look like. So we now know what drone warfare looks like, and we're developing drones, spyware stuff, and that all these prototypes that are being field tested, not just in Ukraine but also in Gaza and Palestine, are going to come to a local law enforcement department near you.
And I think that's the connection that people don't make, that the
Mhm.
cop cities are now popping up more and more, that a lot of these police departments are trained by IDF. So when young people asked me, they were like, wait a minute, what does Israel have to do with the street here in the Bronx? And I said, well, NYPD got an office in Tel Aviv. And they were like, why? And then it's because they use their spyware systems to match your face and to do other stuff. They learn those tactics from there. And yet they still rely heavily on us. So
Mhm.
one thing that I'll tell people is I got some inside information on the United States invasion of Gaza, because that's what it really was. They used the Israelis as their front, but the United States wants that land for the trillions of cubic gas. So it is their operation, whether the Israelis like it or not. And their operation is, no, we're going to dismantle structure. We're going to dismantle leadership. We want the land. We're coming in and we're going to play peacemaker, while we have created a situation in which it looks like utter chaos. But they're playing the little finger role real well, because chaos is a ladder to the United States. The one thing I was going to add is that before we said that we were talking about what existential threats were outside of the United States. And I think there still is one. I don't think they're going to turn internally yet. I think there's still one that's on the board, and that is Yemen. Yemen is a thorn in the side of the United States. Why? Because unlike the rest of the countries, they're a state of their own. And like Hezbollah is inside Lebanon. They're not a state of their own. So the resistance in Iraq is not a state of its own. Even Assad, who was holding on to maybe 8%, 30% of his country, not even a recognizable state of its own. But Yemen, even though it's only half of what it is a state on its own, and it's able to be resupplied by Russia. And during that time in which the Russians sent, remember that stupid news story about, oh, there's a nuclear sub in Cuba again. Yeah.
Yeah.
And at the same time, Greg, look it up. There was a carrier group that landed within a week of that in Yemen. And what did they resupply Yemen with? Surface to air missiles, right?
Hmm.
With short range ballistic missiles, with a bunch of supersonic missiles. Shit that was just like, oh God, what the fuck are they doing? They're making it impossible. They're creating what we call sometimes in these little tactical conversations a spiked ball. The harder you squeeze on that spiked ball, it doesn't hurt the ball. The spikes go through your hand, bro. You're playing with the Russians created a spiked ball in Yemen. The Americans would like to take that piece off the board. And so what I think is going to happen is that they're going to carve a piece out of Somalia and create another independent state on the other side to force them into submission. And I think what's essentially happened in that, for example, they're striving to carve a section out of what I see on the map as Western Somalia, right? They
Hmm.
already have Djibouti, but at the same time, they don't feel like they're a reliable partner. So they need something to intervene. And also, if you see the way that they act militarily towards Yemen and versus Gaza, it's totally different because it's people who have the ability to defend themselves. So when George Bush said to Saddam, you have weapons of mass destruction, and Saddam said, no, I don't, I swear to God, we said, all right, invade him because we know he doesn't. But when we played the same game that year with Kim Jong-un, right? He said, yeah, I got about a dozen of them. Not all of them are going to hit, but I'll take care of San Francisco and LA and Hawaii. Fuck you. Let's go.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
said, okay, you know what? Leave them alone. And so what have we taught people? We've taught people that through American politics, that everything you learn on the playground is a lie. That all that good government, nice guy shit runs the world and kind people rule things. And no, that is a definitive lie in terms of power. The way people achieve power in this country or in anywhere is by hurting the people that other people love, by using leverage, by being able to come in and offer definitive solutions to problems that don't exist
Yeah.
so that they benefit us when they do.
So I do think it's interesting. I've often thought about like Yemen as like the thorn in the side because of their strategic position here in the Gulf of Aden and their ability to disrupt trade through the Suez Canal. But I'm not sure like if like a military intervention is going to happen. Like just like look
No,
at
no,
this
no. I don't
look
think
at
it will.
this terrain.
I
It
don't, but that's
fucking
what I'm saying. That's
sucks.
my point, Greg. It can't.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to have that terrain. For example, if we look at and you don't got to be in the military. You could be a person with a map that you're doing right now. If you look at the difference between a place like Iraq, Gaza, and then Afghanistan, I was
Mhm.
explaining to people why do you think they built NORAD in a mountain range? There's no bunker buster that's getting through fucking 400 meters of sedentary rock. It's the same thing in Afghanistan. You got people living in a cave. You want to bunker buster the cave, they're gonna laugh at you while they're making chai fucking half a mile under the earth. But in other places, you don't have those type of natural border defenses. The United States benefits greatly from its natural border defenses. It has an ocean between the people that it has conflict with. It has a gulf between other states that it's not necessarily allied to it. It has massive bodies of water between them and China and other places. But again, that is then I would say that's then that's then supplementary to their proxy wars and the economic engagement that they have. So
Yeah.
I say that if you want my prediction, I think in terms of Yemen, they're going to go for the carrot and the stick approach. If
Mhm.
before they try anything in terms of military aid, they'll say, hey, look, Russia's weak. I can already see the American pitch. Russia's weak. They can't help you. They left every other nation here in the region. You want to come
Yeah.
with us? Just listen, just stay out of this thing with Iran, We'll be cool with you. We'll give you aid. We'll make sure you don't have anything. We're going to end this thing in Gaza.
Yeah, we'll take you off the foreign terrorist organization list, so you can
Right.
get you don't have your assets, your national assets frozen.
But it's also
All
because,
the while, we already have base in Djibouti. We're gonna
Mhm.
have a military presence here in Western Somalia. Saudi Arabia is ours, and we're gonna put some guys in Oman, and we're just gonna completely isolate you.
Mm. And I think what I was going to also say is that this also gives the United States cover and Israel cover for building what a lot of people have said is the ultimate goal in that region, which is the Ben Gurion Canal, to be able to ship through there because they don't want to use the Suez Canal anymore. The Ben Gurion Canal was slated to be in the southern part of Israel through the port that was shut because of Yemen, and then it was going to turn and come out slightly above where the border of Gaza is. And what
Yeah,
I think is so interesting about that is that now that Gaza has been decimated, has been leveled and devastated by this genocide, the northern part is going to be cleared out to create a buffer zone, not for people, but for the canal. This project wasn't just so they could build houses for Jewish immigrants. No, that's the naivety of it. No, they're
hmm
not building settlements on that area yet. And if they do, it's just cover for their canal. Their canal is the real issue. It's been always the real issue. In the
and
same way that
it's
Nicaragua is inventing its own canal right now. All these other countries that are in a position to say, I want to benefit too from something that has traditionally been a staple of one entrance, one exit. No, I want the same rights. I want my own Walter Frey Bridge. I want to
yeah.
have something I control.
And the Western powers have never been comfortable with Egypt being in control of the Suez Canal and responsible for its security. Like, remember what was in the late 50s when the Suez Canal got shut down? The fucking Brits dropped in airborne divisions to like get that thing reopened. It was a mess of an invasion. It was a complete catastrophe. But there was one of the reasons that when the new Trump administration came in, Marco Rubio like froze all foreign military aid to everybody except Israel and Egypt.
Mhm.
Egypt will always get funding because they need that canal open, and they also hate that they have to do that, which is why we put Sisi in there because he's controllable. We don't want a Democratic president in Egypt because he might decide to take matters into his own hands, which we don't also like. So yeah, the Ben Gurion Canal makes a lot of sense from an imperialist perspective. Also, they want security for their new Silk Road,
Mm.
Mumbai to Europe pipeline. So the thought is that they're going to do a Mumbai through UAE, put it on trains through Saudi, go through Jordan, and come out. I think the port of Ashdod, and then ship to Europe. And that's supposed to be in competition with Chinese Belt and Road Global Infrastructure Initiative. So there's a lot of shit going on with Gaza. We just wanted to point that out.
No. But that's. I think it's important to know that
Mhm.
because obviously anyone with a pulse is horrified at what they saw at 30,000 dead children. At people, and that's just the estimated number because we still haven't picked people out of the rubble. We have no idea actually how many people are actually dead. And I think what has happened as a result of that is showing that you can really desensitize the population to the point where they'll debate whether a genocide is going on when they see it with their own eyes. And the only children's story I can relate this to is a book I read when I was a little kid called The Emperor's New Clothes.
Mm.
And for the kids that are the younger people that are watching this show that maybe never read that book, it's a book about a bunch of frauds that pretend to be tailors and they make invisible clothes that they claim only smart people can see. And so if you can't see the king's clothes, you must be stupid. And so they make nothing on these fake looms where there's no thread, and they use this invisible thread to put on the king, and the king walks around naked, and the people pretend that his clothes are beautiful, and they make these comments, "Oh my sir, your gown is amazing. Your clothes are incredible," right? And this is what I see on right-wing YouTube. This is what I see on liberal YouTube. I see people that are complimenting the emperor's clothes, whether it's on the Democrat Party side or the Republican Party side. But my brothers and sisters, the emperor is naked. If you keep watching Greg's show, you'll see that the emperor is naked. He's not wearing any clothes. They're not there for a humanitarian mission. And whether you are a Democrat or Republican or fall somewhere in the middle, my closing question to your audience is, let me ask them something. Do they think it's a coincidence that there are a trillion cubic feet of natural gas off the coast of Gaza, and that's why we got involved in there? Or do they think that that's a coincidence? That's
I don't
the
know.
only thing I would ask. Do they think that that's a coincidence, or do you think that that's par for the course? Because if that's a coincidence, then there's so oh my God, Iraq
There's
just
so many
happened to have
flukes.
oil, right?
So many
Afghanistan
flukes.
just happened to have $1 trillion worth of natural resources like nickel, tin, and all these other things, right?
Yeah.
The Congo just happens to have a whetstone uranium 235. Niger just happens to have that. That's why we care about these places, right? Or maybe we really care about those people. That's why we've done nothing for them since the beginning of our existence.
Yeah, no, democracy. Also, you'd also have to reconcile the Lindsey Graham interview that we referenced earlier.
Right.
Yeah, so.
Where he says, hey, this money's coming back to America. We're not giving this to the Ukraine. It's coming to contractors. It's coming to farmers. We're basically opening a company store for them, which in his own, infinite foghorn leghorn wisdom, what he's done is basically show people, hey, listen, this is a money laundering operation, and this is how it works. When we tell another country, hey, we have millions in aid for you, we're not showing up there with a bag full of millions of dollars. Well, sometimes we do, but most of the vast majority, 99% of the time, what we're doing is saying, hey, we're giving you a $500 million line of credit to buy things exclusively from us. And therefore, they'll be exclusively from us, and they'll still be technically in our control. So I'll bring up one example and then turn it over to you. One example that I would give is the closest allies of the United States in the Middle East have F-16 fighters, which they think are top of the line. The only problem is that the Pentagon has the ability to turn any of those fighters off. Not a self-destruct thing like the Death Star. No, it just turns the system off. The pilot will survive, but he has to eject. But the multi-million-dollar piece of hardware is hitting the ground like a fucking rock. Okay, so even if you get the most advanced equipment from the United States and they open up the store for you and you get $1 billion in aid and you buy a bunch of fighters, you can't use them for what you want. You can use them for what they want. They didn't put a gun in your hand for you to defend yourself. They put a gun in your hand for you to defend their interests. That's what you're doing.
Yeah, not only can the Pentagon turn them off, this is one last point I want to make that we've talked about how U.S. sells weapons and all this Cadillac next-gen shit to foreign militaries. It's because, yes, you might own the F-16 Falcon, but guess who's the only one who can build and sell replacement parts?
Right. Yeah.
General Dynamics. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you piss us off and we put you under sanctions, you cannot get General Dynamics parts.
Right.
You're gonna have a bunch of hangar queens that can't leave the fucking hangar.
Right. Or you're gonna have to go to someone else who they're not as reliable as who we may be. They won't give you the exact parts that we have. You may be able to get them on the black market, but they'll cost you 10 times more. Right. In that sense, sure. It's like saying, sure, you want to keep that. But like you said, most of them won't have the money to re-outfit all of the aircraft. So while one or two they might be able to do that with by overpaying for those parts, the vast majority of them are going to be stuck in a situation where they're like, no, you're right. Man, what the fuck did I sign up for? I basically got a gun that I have to ask them every time I load it or put a bullet in it. And that's essentially what they've sold you. They've sold you a weapon that only works when they wanted to for their causes, not for your causes. Yeah. And if you do brutalize someone with it, it better be your own people and not someone we didn't tell you to do that to.
Yeah. Hear no evil, see no evil. So, all right, man. Well, I think we covered a lot of ground.
Definitely, man.
Yeah.
This might have to be a 2-part episode, but I just wanted to tell everybody out there, I really appreciate people tuning in to the show, Colonial Outcast with Greg Stoker, Immortal Technique. If you want to see me, I'm on immortaltechnique.com. I got a bunch of shows coming up in New York, Cali, and then some in I think eventually we're going to Australia. But we're popping up at a bunch of different places. So come to immortaltechnique.com.
Do you perform regularly in New York? I'm there like 6 times a year. So
I actually got a show on my birthday. Me, Lord Finesse, and Grand Poobah on February 19th at SOB's. The club's in downtown. It's SOBS.com. So please come by. It's gonna be a wonderful night of 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 hardcore hip hop. And I'll send you a flyer later on. I'll just text it to you, Greg. So if you want to share it, you want to come by, I'll put you on the guest list. It's gonna be a great night. Hardcore hip hop, and it's also my birthday, and I've decided to quit smoking that day, so it's going to be an interesting day.
Well, good luck. Break a leg on the show, and good luck with you not smoking.
I hope so, man. I hope so.
All right, man. Well, I will post all Immortal Techniques links in the description. Thank y'all so much for listening, and we will see you tomorrow for our weekly comedic episode before the horror of the weekend goes down. So cheers, y'all, and we'll be checking in with you soon.
Peace.